Hey, how much longer?
How long are you going to make us wait?
Angry voices echoed across the event hall. The seminar, hosted by the company, had hit its biggest snag. The attendees didn't understand English or German. Standing frozen and pale from shock was the seminar manager, the company president's daughter.
Well, well,
In the midst of the chaos, I grabbed the microphone, and the atmosphere in the hall changed instantly.
you. Who are you?
I woke up in the uncomfortable airplane seat, glanced outside the window, and saw a dense cluster of buildings below. The small, flat looking structures gradually turned into massive skyscrapers. The neon lights of Times Square flickered under the fading night sky, and the Empire State Building stood tall. I shifted my gaze from the dawn-stained scenery to the flower-shaped paper craft in my hand and murmured, "I'm home." Lucas Taylor, 28 years old. I had returned to America. 15 years ago, my parents died in a car accident. A massive pileup on the interstate. My dad's car was rear-ended and crashed into a tanker ahead. The front of the car was so crushed that it was unrecognizable. The driver and passenger seats were completely mangled and were featured heavily on the news that day, highlighting the devastation. My dad, who was driving, and my mom, who was in the passenger seat, didn't survive, but I, a 13-year-old sitting in the back seat at the time, made it out alive. We had been on our way to visit my little sister Emily in a large New York hospital. Emily, who was 2 years younger than me, had a congenital heart condition and was frequently in and out of the hospital. That day, her doctor had said that Emily was doing better and could possibly be discharged temporarily the following week. While our parents were talking with the doctor, Emily and I played with paper crafts. The ride back home was filled with laughter as we talked about what kind of cake to buy to celebrate her return and what meals we'd cook together. Then, in an instant, everything happened. It was all over in the blink of an eye. In my hand was the morning glory flower Emily had made that day. Both of my dad's parents had already passed away, so my maternal grandmother took in Emily and me. But she was already living alone, and caring for a middle schooler like me and a sick child like Emily by herself was overwhelming. On top of that, I had withdrawn into myself after the shock of the accident. My memories of that time are hazy. The one who reached out to me during that time was my Uncle Jack, my mom's younger brother. My uncle, who traveled to various places around the world for work, was always busy, so I didn't know him well, but my mom had always told me since I was little that he was her beloved younger brother and someone she was proud of.
Lucas, how about coming with me and seeing the world?
He said this with absolute conviction as I stood silently at my parents' grave. For an uncle who had embraced the freedom of being single, suddenly taking in a middle schooler was a huge commitment. From then on, I traveled all over the world with him. Sometimes we'd stay in a country for a year, and other times only a few months. Jack never let me worry about money, but he believed in fostering independence and rarely intervened. At first, I was consumed by emotional shock and the sudden change in my environment, but little by little, I learned to communicate with the world around me. Meanwhile, Emily stayed with our grandmother in the States, continuing her cycle of hospital admissions and discharges. After losing her parents so suddenly, her brother also unexpectedly left for overseas. The sense of loss felt by an 11-year-old girl must have been overwhelming. Whenever I returned to the US, usually once a year, Emily would cling to me with a radiant smile. Even as she grew older, she still acted like the same 11-year-old girl, holding back sobs with a flushed face whenever I had to leave. I would wipe away Emily's falling tears, promising her each time, "I'll definitely come back for you once I'm able to work." In return, Emily would hand me a flower-shaped paper craft she had made. She would call it a good luck charm, as if entrusting her hopes and wishes to that piece of paper. Work in America and live with Emily. That was my dream and my purpose. To support Emily's medical needs, I needed a stable income and a solid living environment. Following Jack's advice, I graduated from a university in Switzerland in 4 years. I found a job with an American company. Now I can finally live with Emily. When I called to share the good news, Emily's voice sounded happier than I had ever heard. But right after that, the global pandemic struck, making it nearly impossible to leave Switzerland. Days passed in the frustrating limbo of helplessness, waiting for the crisis to end, and then the worst happened.
Emily has.
My grandmother's frail voice on the phone sounded distant. Emily, who had fought so hard despite being told she might not live past 20, had reached the end of her fight. I couldn't even attend her funeral and was unable to say goodbye to the only family I had left. I canceled my planned job with the American company and ended up working in Switzerland, unable to return to the US even after travel restrictions were lifted. I still couldn't accept a world without Emily. This year, I was assigned to transfer to the US branch and return to America for the first time in 7 years.
Welcome home, Lucas.
After handling the paperwork for my new apartment, I headed to my grandmother's house in the evening. She looked smaller than I remembered from our last meeting.
You're staying for dinner, right? Oh, but first, you should say hi to everyone.
My grandmother, who was always eager to care for me when we met after so long, suddenly glanced toward the back room. There was a memorial space in that room, adorned with photos of my parents and a smiling young girl. I felt the world sway for a moment. Who is in that photo? The pounding in my ears grew louder. Was that the sound of my own heartbeat? Unable to bear the growing tightness in my chest, I mumbled an excuse about an urgent matter and rushed out of my grandmother's house. I wandered the streets to calm my racing heart. Night had already fallen. New York was as lively as ever, crowded with people to the point where I wondered how anyone could live in such a bustling place. Among this sea of people, I felt like Emily could be somewhere out there. That thought gave me a strange sense of comfort. The humid June air brought back memories of New York seasons. Holding a strong canned cocktail I bought at a liquor shop, I aimlessly wandered the streets. Only in New York could I get away with something like this. As my heartbeat settled, I exhaled and stopped walking. Before I knew it, I had wandered into a back alley near the entertainment district, the so-called nightlife scene. That's when I heard a woman's voice cry out, "Let me go." I turned toward the sound and saw a man grabbing a woman's arm while smirking. The woman raised her voice, trying to free herself, but the people around her only glanced over and quickly looked away, making no attempt to help. This wasn't exactly the safest area, so maybe scenes like this were all too common. While I debated whether to intervene or look the other way, the man passed by me, dragging the woman toward the deeper part of the alley. I decided to stay out of it, but then I caught a familiar scent as they passed. I knew that smell. Emily. Before I realized it, I was sprinting into the alley. The man looked shocked when I appeared out of nowhere, and his face turned pale when I suddenly grabbed him by the collar. I must have looked terrifying, shouting at him like a madman, my eyes undoubtedly wild with rage. The man panicked and ran off, leaving the woman behind. I turned to her and hugged her tightly. "I'm sorry. I'm so late." A mix of alcohol and the sterile scent of hospitals clung to her. "It's really Emily. She's alive." Overwhelmed with joy and on the verge of tears, I hugged Emily even tighter. But suddenly, the woman's body tensed, and she began to struggle against my embrace.
Let go of me.
The moment my grip loosened, pain exploded across my cheek.
Let go, you creep.
As I registered the slap that landed without mercy, I was startled by the unfamiliar voice. "Who is this woman?" Standing before me was a stranger. She did seem to be around Emily's age, but the woman glaring at me with eyes full of confusion, anger, and fear looked nothing like the Emily I knew. "I'm sorry. I thought you were my sister." "That's right. Emily couldn't be here." I knew that. I really did.
Your sister? What's wrong with you? Are you crazy?
The woman's face twisted in disgust as she turned and ran off. Her lingering scent was still that familiar smell. The humid air wouldn't let it leave my nose. What the hell is wrong with me? Maybe the strong alcohol dulled my senses and made me lose it. I stood frozen in that spot, unable to move for a long time. The following Monday was my first day working at the U.S. branch. My job was to promote our medical products at events and seminars. I was scheduled to be stationed there for 1 to 2 years to help expand our market share in the U.S. and beyond.
Lucas, you'll be assisting with the next scheduled seminar and event. This is Mary Sutherland, the event manager.
After being introduced by my supervisor, Mary and I exchanged greetings and then froze as we looked at each other. Once my supervisor finished explaining everything and left, an awkward tension filled the air between us. Well, I really am sorry for the other day. Even though it was a case of mistaken identity, I put you through a terrifying experience. I was the first to break the silence. Standing before me was Mary, the woman I had mistaken for Emily and hugged that night.
I never expected that the guy from the other night would turn out to be from our company, let alone someone transferred from the headquarters. Should I call the police?
I'm really sorry. I know this sounds like a lame excuse, but I had just arrived in the US that day, was jet lagged, and had been drinking. I wasn't thinking straight. Hearing my own words made me realize just how pathetic they sounded. Mary let out a small sigh.
Please. You can raise your head now. It's true that you reeked of alcohol that night. Being drunk doesn't excuse your actions. But regardless of your intentions, you did save me in a dangerous situation. So I won't speak about this incident. You're supposed to be a highly skilled specialist sent from the main office. As long as you deliver results at work, I don't care about your personal character. However, don't approach me unnecessarily.
While making it clear she didn't trust me, she never brought up the incident again after that. With her sharp, confident gaze, flawless makeup, and long, slightly wavy hair, she was the epitome of a capable professional. The more I looked at her, the less she resembled Emily. After that disastrous first encounter, I never noticed the same unique scent of alcohol around her again. A few days later, I learned from my colleagues that Mary was the branch manager's daughter. This company wasn't the kind of place where executives could simply hire their relatives. She went through the same hiring process as other employees and even faced her father during the final interview. It's well known in the company that the branch manager had no idea his own daughter was applying until the day of the interview and was genuinely shocked when she walked in. Mary was exceptional at her job and had already led several major projects at just 26 years old. I felt both admiration and a pang of sadness knowing that a woman Emily's age had accomplished so much, something my sister never got the chance to do. I found myself searching for connections between my sister and her, even though they were nothing alike, but I forced those thoughts out of my mind and threw myself into my work. By the time 2 months had passed at the branch, Mary's guarded attitude toward me seemed to have softened somewhat. Today, we had a meeting with representatives from the company we were co-hosting the seminar with next month. It was my first time attending, so I'd be meeting their representatives for the first time. Before the meeting, I asked Mary about the representative from the other company. She replied, "I don't think we'll get any valuable input from them, so we'll handle the discussion ourselves and wrap it up quickly," a response that could easily be taken as condescending. I was surprised by her blunt comment. In the 2 months I'd known her, Mary had never struck me as someone who looked down on others. Feeling puzzled, I entered the meeting room, and when the representative from the other company called out to me, I immediately understood, and it all made sense.
Lucas, are you Lucas Taylor?
That was his first response to my greeting. Having worked in Switzerland, where business etiquette was more casual, I'd initially struggled with formal English in professional settings, and I still wasn't fully used to it. but even I felt like frowning at the way this man leaned in close and shouted his greeting. "Have we met before?" Forcing a smile to keep from frowning, I asked politely, and he looked at me as if I'd said something ridiculous.
It's me, Brian Jones. We were in middle school together. You remember, right? We were in the same class in 7th grade until you moved out. I even hung out with you back then.
As he grinned and introduced himself, I dredged up vague memories until I finally recalled him. "Oh, right, Brian. Long time no see. I never expected to run into you in a professional setting." I had been in an accident before summer break in 7th grade and left the country with my uncle that winter. To be honest, I barely remembered anything from middle school. My time at that school was too short for me to make any real friends. When I returned to school after the accident, most of the students treated me like I was fragile, while others saw me as a source of gossip and pestered me with questions about the accident. Brian had been one of those kids.
You stopped coming to school, and then you left without saying goodbye. We thought you might have, done something drastic because of losing your parents.
His grin made it clear that he had never been genuinely worried. It had always been a joke to him.
Still, I can't believe you're with that company now. Are you a temp or something? Or are you a high school graduate?
Brian's smirk widened as he said something so absurd I was momentarily speechless.
Don't worry. I'll guide you during this event, so you don't mess things up. You better not drag Mary down. Mary, you can count on me.
He suddenly turned his attention to Mary and started boasting with an air of exaggerated confidence. Such a blatant attempt to show off, and it's completely unprofessional. Just as I was about to speak up to steer the conversation back on track,
Excuse me, but our company only hires college graduates. And yes, that includes Lucas. He's an employee from the Swiss headquarters, and technically, I'm the one who should be learning from him. I'm sure you can learn quite a bit from Lucas during this event, Brian. Also, while our company hires only college graduates, personally, I don't think academic background matters that much. After all, some people have impressive degrees but lack character.
Mary spoke calmly, not even glancing at Brian. Before Brian, his face flushed red, could say anything, I urged everyone to move on due to time constraints. Only Mary responded with a calm, "Let's move on to the main topic," before smoothly transitioning to the work discussion. One of Brian's assistants looked awkward, while Brian himself remained silent, barely hiding his irritation. Once the meeting ended and we were alone, I turned to Mary. "Mary, thanks for stepping in earlier, but you really didn't have to. Won't that cause tension between the companies? I feel like it's my fault for being here." This event was officially a joint collaboration, but Mary was the one in charge. A conflict involving the person responsible would undoubtedly complicate things.
It's not your fault, Lucas, so don't worry about it. Brian has always acted that way, and I just reached my limit.
She shrugged with a faint smile and said, "Was I a bit childish?" Seeing her playful side, I shrugged and chuckled, saying, "That last line really packed a punch."
I really hate people who label others, look down on them, and make snap judgments without knowing the full story.
That straightforward opinion was so typical of Mary.
But to be honest, when I was a kid, I used to do the same thing, jumping to conclusions about people. There were always people talking behind my back because of who my dad was, and that just made me more rebellious. But someone told me that wasn't right. She said to me and to the kids who looked at me with prejudice, "It's a waste to judge someone based on just one side of who they are."
Sounds like an amazing person. She responded quietly, yes, she really was, her long lashes lowering with a hint of sadness. After that, the daily work and preparations for the event went smoothly. Brian never brought up the incident again. In fact, he didn't just stay silent, but he practically did nothing. He only completed tasks when explicitly instructed. As Mary had predicted, there was no valuable input from him. The day of the seminar event arrived. The main target audience was foreign healthcare workers hoping to work in the U.S. American healthcare facilities are highly regarded worldwide, attracting many international nurses hoping to work in the country. Applications came from people in various countries, particularly from Europe. An hour before the event's start time, despite the preparation being scheduled to begin 2 hours prior, Brian was nowhere to be seen. Some of the necessary equipment and materials for this event were his responsibility to prepare. They were also in charge of providing the translation devices that contained audio recordings of the seminar content and materials, customized by language for the attendees. This seminar was promoted as accessible even to those without knowledge of German, since medical terminology is difficult even for those fluent in German. The translation devices tailored to each participant's language were a key feature. Without them, complaints from the attendees were inevitable. I'd tried calling Brian multiple times, but he wasn't answering. His assistant had another event to handle today and couldn't make it, so Brian was supposed to come alone. Since the event was being held on a Sunday, the company office itself was closed, so calling the office line was useless. We were completely stuck. Time dwindled down to the last 30 minutes. The seats in the venue were gradually filling up with attendees. There were 50 attendees in total. Although it wasn't a large-scale event, the seminar played an important role in collecting data that would be useful for the development of future electronic medical records. To ensure future seminars, this event needed to be a success. The clock was ticking. Seeing Mary's growing anxiety, I told her to stall for time by briefly touching on the seminar content during her opening remarks and then stepped away. When I returned a few minutes later, complaints had already begun to erupt from the attendees.
Hey, how much longer?
How long are you going to keep us waiting?
Despite her flustered state, Mary was holding her ground and delivering her speech in German, impressive as always.
I'm very sorry. Please wait just a little longer.
However, many attendees weren't German speakers. Seeing Mary struggling to respond to attendees who were pressing her in languages other than German, I stepped forward and began speaking. My sincerest apologies for the delay. We'll be ready shortly, so in the meantime, I'll take any questions you have. I announced this in German and as many other languages as I could manage. As Mary stood speechless beside me, I continued switching between German and other languages to calm the attendees and buy us more time. Once we stepped away from the front, Mary turned to me and said, "Lucas, that was amazing." "How many languages do you speak?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. "Well, after living in so many countries, including Spanish and German, maybe 6, but only at a conversational level, and it's nothing formal. Anyway, the real challenge starts now." Still no response from Brian. What should we do? Sure, I can handle basic conversations, but when it comes to medical content, we really need the translation devices that Brian was supposed to provide. Mary, visibly stressed, took out her phone. Something fell from her pocket. Mary, you dropped something. A paper craft? I picked up a flower-shaped paper craft. It was laminated, worn at the edges, and looked quite old.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my good luck charm.
I couldn't take my eyes off it, making Mary look at me curiously.
Well, right. Sorry, I'll be right back. I'm going to buy some paper craft supplies from the store next door.
She dashed off toward the building adjacent to the venue. 10 minutes later, she returned, slightly out of breath, and began distributing 2 sheets of paper to each participant.
Lucas, could you translate what I'm about to say to the attendees?
She set up the camera to film her hands and displayed the footage on the monitor.
I'd like to introduce you to paper crafting, an activity that's also used in American pediatric wards and rehabilitation centers.
With that statement, Mary kicked off an impromptu paper craft workshop. Often thought of as just a kid's activity, paper crafting is sometimes incorporated into medical and caregiving settings. The simple yet intricate use of both hands and brain stimulation, combined with customizable difficulty levels, makes it an effective rehabilitation exercise. As she explained this, the paper craft workshop surprisingly captivated the participants. As they followed along and began making their crafts, everyone seemed both focused and genuinely enjoying themselves. Midway through the workshop, Brian's assistant finally arrived with the translation devices, allowing the seminar to continue as planned. The seminar, which had been delayed by about 30 minutes, finally concluded. As I saw a female participant happily holding a misshapen paper flower on her way out, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Once the room was empty, it fell silent.
What do you think you're doing?
Mary's clear, composed voice rang through the quiet venue, tinged with anger. The assistant and Brian had arrived during the paper craft workshop because I had called the assistant directly. Brian, who hadn't expected me to have his assistant's contact information, glared at Mary with a bitter expression.
Why did we go 30 minutes over the rental time? This is a shared seminar event. You can't just run over like that. Well, since you're the main coordinator, I guess your side will cover the cost, right? The content was well received, wasn't it? Do you have any complaints about that?
Brian, what the hell are you saying?
Even Brian's assistant looked bewildered by his nonsensical remarks.
Do you even realize the chaos you caused? Or did you show up late on purpose to sabotage things? Do you have any pride in your work at all?
Mary's rising anger was palpable.
I was late. Who says I was? Stop accusing me. Hey, I was here the whole time, right?
He placed a hand on the assistant's shoulder, blatantly intimidating him. The assistant looked too scared to contradict him. I felt a wave of disgust at Brian's reckless actions and childish attempts to bully others.
Can you still say that after seeing the company car footage?
Mary's tone, once fiery, turned cold and sharp. Huh? Brian looked confused, so I added more context. The company car you used today belongs to our company. All our cars are equipped with dash cams. Brian had been using one of our company cars for transporting equipment. At that, Brian's face turned pale. The dash cam's GPS, time-stamped route, and in-car footage and audio would clearly reveal the truth, and his lies could be reported to the company without issue.
This will be reported to your company, and I'll also report the repeated, unnecessary personal messages you've sent me as harassment. Don't contact me ever again.
Mary's expression was as cold as ice, her anger replaced by a chilling finality. Brian's face went ghostly white, and there was no way we'd ever work with him again. Cheers.
Cheers.
Despite the ups and downs, the seminar event gave us a solid sense of accomplishment, so Mary and I went out for drinks to celebrate. Thinking about it, this was the first time we'd gone out for drinks together. Even though it was September, the humidity lingered, and the night air felt uncomfortably warm. The ice-cold beer was refreshing, cutting through the muggy atmosphere. Brian was messaging you personally? Why didn't you report it to the company earlier?
I wanted to wait until the seminar event was over. I was trying to handle it peacefully, but after today, I completely lost my patience. I'm going to make sure he can never work with us again.
She spoke casually, nibbling on a pickle, as though used to dealing with unwanted advances. At a glance, she's a radiant and beautiful woman. It's no surprise that plenty of men try to approach her. Nothing happened this time, but you should be careful. If something like that happens again, report it to the executives sooner. It's too late once something happens.
Lucas, are you secretly a worrywart? You're like a dad or maybe an older brother, considering your age.
Mary burst out laughing at my advice, making me feel a bit embarrassed, like I had overreacted. I had a younger sister. Maybe that's why I tend to worry when it comes to women around her age.
A younger sister. Oh yeah, you mentioned that when we first met, right? Was that true?
Hearing the word sister seemed to jog her memory of our first encounter, and she asked for the truth now of all times. I let out a sigh and slumped my shoulders. I probably came across as suspicious, and I really did something terrible that day. But yes, it's true. I had a younger sister who was 2 years younger than me. She would have been the same age as you.
You had a sister. What happened to her?
She passed away. At my words, Mary whispered, "I'm so sorry," as if apologizing for something she couldn't quite name. More importantly, that spontaneous papercraft workshop you came up with today. It was brilliant. It was such a creative idea, and I think it could be a great addition to future international seminar events. If we got help from physical therapists or specialists, we could make it even more impactful, don't you think? I changed the subject, trying to shift the mood. Saying out loud that Emily was gone had left me feeling shaken.
I came up with it on the spot after seeing that papercraft charm. It really felt like it helped me out, you know?
She pulled the charm from her pocket and gazed at it with a wistful smile.
I think I told you before about someone who once told me, it's a waste to judge someone based on just one side of who they are. The person who made this charm for me was the one who said that.
Mary told me that she had suffered from a serious illness and had spent a lot of time in the hospital as a child. After numerous surgeries and a long stay, she was now able to live a relatively normal life with regular check-ins. During her time in the hospital, she became friends with the girl who had given her the papercraft charm. While Mary eventually recovered, the girl's condition was something that modern medicine couldn't fully cure. Even after Mary was discharged and started attending middle school, she continued visiting the hospital to see her friend.
She had lost her parents in an accident and lived separately from her brother. She always seemed a little lonely. But whenever I visited, she'd brighten up and talk to me excitedly. She was so kind and got along with everyone in the hospital. They told her it might be difficult for her to live past 20, but she fought hard and reached 20. She was so close to finally living with her brother, who was overseas. But then,
Mary's voice trembled and her eyes glistened faintly with tears. It was my Emily. At the sound of her name, Mary's eyes widened in shock. Emily, she was my one and only sister.
no way. You're Emily's brother?
We both fell into stunned silence. Could this really be happening? Was it even possible that Mary was Emily's friend? The coincidence seemed unreal.
I had no idea you were her brother. I said such horrible things when we first met, and I never even thanked you properly for saving me that night. Thank you.
She lowered her head suddenly, and I panicked, telling her to lift her head. I remembered how Emily, who couldn't go out freely due to her long hospital stays, was really good at making paper crafts. Mary, by any chance, did you visit the hospital that day?
Oh, yes. I had a routine checkup, so I went to the hospital and was on my way home.
The distinctive scent of alcohol I noticed when we first met. It wasn't just my imagination after all. I can't remember Emily's voice anymore. Without looking at a photo, I felt like I might forget Emily's face, but that scent stayed vividly in my mind. It became the memory that anchored me. As I lowered my head and murmured, "I see," Mary gently spoke to me.
Emily always said she was so proud of you, Lucas. She said you'd come back from overseas every year, bringing her souvenirs and stories from your travels. She'd get so excited and determined to recover enough for temporary discharge whenever you were coming back.
I wasn't the kind of brother she could be proud of. After we lost our parents, I barely spent any time with her. Her words made me painfully aware of how powerless I had been as her brother.
That's not true. Emily said Lucas was amazing. No matter how you see yourself in her eyes, you were the coolest, most beloved brother. Honestly, she talked about you so much that I started wondering just how awesome her brother really was.
Surprised by her rapid words, I looked at her face. Our eyes met, and she was smiling with a tearful expression and softly murmured, "Yeah, it's true." Just like Emily said, "Lucas, you really are a wonderful person." I wondered what kind of expression I had at that moment. Unlike her tearful eyes, mine felt completely dry. The following week, everything returned to normal at work. With the seminar event wrapped up, my paired assignments with Mary had come to an end, and we no longer crossed paths at work. One Friday night, I received a message from Mary, even though we hadn't really spoken much all week.
Would you like to visit Emily's grave with me this weekend?
I had been thinking about it all week. I hadn't been able to properly say goodbye to Emily. Maybe it was time to find closure. I accepted her invitation and left home Saturday morning. It was about an hour-and-a-half train ride from the city, somewhere not quite urban, but not too rural either. It had been a long time since I'd returned to my hometown. Emily now rested in the same place as my parents. The cemetery was about a 30-minute taxi ride from the station, a vast, well-maintained green space. Every time I returned to the U.S., I made sure to visit my parents' grave. But this was the first time in 7 years. I couldn't help but feel like an ungrateful son. We arrived at the gravesite. For some reason, I couldn't take a single step forward. Emily is here. Just the thought of it made my vision blur. Then I felt a soft hand on my back, gently soothing me. It was Mary who had come with me. Despite barely having spoken during the trip, I was grateful for the silence between us. Taking a deep breath, I finally stepped up to the grave. I placed the flowers I'd brought, lit the candle, and pressed my hands together in prayer. "Dad and Mom, I'm home." I greeted my parents, but I couldn't bring myself to speak to Emily. The gravestone now bearing more than just my parents' names. The reality that Emily was truly here hit me hard.
Lucas, I received this as a keepsake from your grandmother, but I think you should have it.
Mary handed me an old smartphone. It was an outdated model that Emily had used for years. It was still charged and could be powered on. Inside were photos that Emily had taken. There were photos of her with Mary, smiling happily alongside her friends her age, friends I'd never seen before, and the sight made me smile. It hit me then, and I had never taken a photo with Emily. I'd always avoided the camera, saying I didn't like photos. I regretted it now. In the folder titled Big Brother, there were childhood photos of Emily and me, likely taken from our family albums, and scenic pictures I had taken abroad and sent to her.
Well, I wasn't sure if I should show you, but check the drafts folder.
When I opened the email inbox as she suggested, there was indeed a single unsent message in the drafts folder. I opened the folder and read through it for a while, but I was left speechless.
Big brother, I was so happy when you told me over the phone that you were coming back to the US and that we could live together. I said I was excited, but the truth is, we can't live together after all. Because you'd push yourself too hard for me, wouldn't you, Lucas? I probably don't have much time left. I don't want to see you sad because of me. I want you to live your own life freely. It might sound a bit dramatic, but this is my wish. If I'm allowed one last selfish request, please cry a lot when I'm gone. Cry, and don't forget me. But after you've cried, live happily and laugh again. Live your life. I love you, my big brother.
I scrolled down and saw one more line of text.
Lucas, I miss you.
Tears streamed down my face as I read the message. The message had been written just a week before Emily passed away. What was Emily feeling as she typed it? What was going through her mind? What expression did she wear? How many times had she rewritten it? Was she crying, smiling, in pain, scared? Sniff. A strangled sob escaped my lips. A grown man kneeling at a grave, crying his heart out. It must have looked ridiculous. But I didn't care about that. Emily was gone. For the first time, I fully accepted that reality. Mary knelt beside me, not caring that the ground stained her clothes, and gently wrapped her arms around my shoulder as I sobbed.
You finally cried. Holding back tears when you want to cry. It's so painful, isn't it?
Mary's soft voice and the steady beat of her heart reached my ears. Yeah, you're alive. That sound reminded me of life itself, and gradually my tears began to subside.
Emily used to say, if Lucas and Mary got married, we could stay together as a family forever. It was like a little kid's fairy tale. But sometimes I feel like Emily brought us together. After you've cried and cried, once you've cried it all out, why don't you try living and laughing with me?
In response to her gentle, whispered words, I softly placed my hand over hers on my shoulder. Emily, I'm home. A gentle breeze swept over us, brushing against our heads as if in a tender embrace. The sadness of losing someone never truly goes away. But when you face that sadness head on, you can find something precious in its place.